Hey, this is Tim from ChiroUp, and right now we're all in a period of economic uncertainty, and we're looking for things that can help us stay in business, stay connected to our patients, and hopefully be financially solvent when this is all done. There is an extremely helpful program from the federal government right now, the Payroll Protection Program. It has a lot of great benefits that you and I can use. There's only one problem. I'm a clinician and I don't understand it very well, but fortunately, I have a great friend, Jeff Pawlow, who is a leader in the accounting industry. Jeff has a consulting firm for accountants. He deals with hundreds of accountants throughout the world. Jeff was named one of the most influential people in accounting at one point in time. And Jeff works with the majority of the top 100 firms in the United States. So we've got the right person on the phone to answer these things about the payroll protection plan. Jeff, could you tell us a little bit about what that plan is?
You know, it's interesting. It's called the Payroll Protection Plan, and it's a subset of the CARES Act that Congress passed last week and the president signed into law over the weekend. The goal of the program, and the statute sets aside about $350 billion to fund this program, is to help small businesses that have fewer than 500 employees maintain payroll while we're going through this crisis and many firms are being forced to shut down or sharply curtail their business. And the way that that's going to work, yesterday the Treasury released the official application. You can get that at sba.gov. And it's fairly streamlined, but what they're going to ask you to do is to calculate what an average month looked for you just before the crisis started. So picture your payroll in January or February, what you paid all of your employees, and you're able to add back things like health insurance and some of the taxes, and even in some cases 401k contribution. So you're going to add up those numbers, or interest on a mortgage payment if you own your building. And so they're kind of trying to figure out what is your baseline nut for the month. Now, the one caveat to all that is salaries cap at $100,000. So if you've got somebody that's making 125, or maybe somebody that's making 90, but as you start to add all the benefits back in, they cross that $100,000 threshold, then those employees will actually be counted as $100,000 and no more than that in the calculation. And so there's a little bit of math that you've got to do with that. Once you've figured out that number, and this is an approximate calculation, but it's 2.5 times that amount. So if you had, let's say, $100,000 as your nut, you could expect to get $250,000 through the payment protection program. The great part about this is if you use those loan proceeds specifically to cover the items that are included in the calculation, so again, payroll, rent, utilities, and things like that, the entire loan is going to be forgiven, but you've got to keep track of that. And so they're going to want a snapshot of what your headcount and payroll looked like before the crisis, and they're going to want to have a demonstration of how you use the money to keep those people on payroll during those 2 months. Otherwise, it converts to a loan, and then you've got to pay that off as you would any other debt. I think the term is 2 years at 0.5%. But as you can imagine, when a large program like this comes down from the government and they're trying to move as fast as that they are, is different guidance is suggesting different things. So I've seen 4% over 2 years, which I believe is what is actually in the statute, but then Treasury came out and said 0.5 point over 2 years. That's all going to get reconciled here in the next couple of days. But just realize if you're using these proceeds for something other than what they're intended to do, and you're going to have to substantiate that you did that, then it's going to convert to an actual loan that you're going to have to pay back.
So what I'm understanding that you're saying is if we use those proceeds for things like wages, for our mortgage, or for our rent, and to maintain our business with those parameters, then we don't pay that amount back. Any amount that we would use for something outside of those parameters turns into a loan then at that point in time.
That's correct. And so let's say you used half of it for the approved expenses. That half would be waived, and the other half would then convert into a note.
And really, in theory, we should be able to use that amount for those expenses. I think the intent of the loan should match up with how it actually turns out. Who is
clearly, that's the intent and the will of the Congress for that to happen.
Who is eligible for this? Do we need a certain type of corporation, a certain type of setup, sole proprietors versus independent contractors, corporations?
Yeah, good question, Tim. Everybody that is under 500 employees is eligible for that. And let me just make sure that I give your listeners the correct information. So the initial applications can be submitted beginning this Friday, so April the 3rd, and that's for small businesses and sole proprietorships. Then the following week on April the 10th, independent contractors and self-employed individuals, they can apply at that point. Here's the one thing I want to make sure that your listeners are paying attention to, because my sense is many of the chiropractic clinics are impacted greatly by this, is you want to be at the front of the line. 350 billion is a lot of money, but it's certainly not enough money to cover every small business's payroll for the next 2 months. And so there's a couple of things that I might suggest your listeners might consider. First of all, the banks don't know what's going on. They're going to be the funding mechanism for all this, and you're going to run it through any SBA approved, FDIC insured institution. So you're going to be working with your banker on that. But in talking to many bankers this week, they're kind of like deer in the headlights where they know they've got to do this, but they're trying to catch up with the guidance. And in addition to that, they've got a stewardship where they've got to kind of certify the numbers, and they're ill-equipped to do that from a staffing standpoint. So what my recommendation to your listeners would be, work with your CPA to pull together the numbers, to fill out the application, but more importantly, pull together the backup that the bank is going to need to really expedite your application through the process. And so it's one thing for you to kind of calculate your payroll in Excel and print that out and include that as part of your application. It's an entirely different thing for you to actually pull the payroll receipts from whatever company you use to process your payroll and say, hey, here's the number. That's going to carry a lot more weight than something that you've come up with yourself. So use your CPA, work through your bank, but do everything you can to get yourself at the front of the line. And here's one more insider tip that a lot of people aren't aware of. The banks will charge a fee for this loan that the government will reimburse the bank for directly. So that's not going to hit you as the consumer. But as part of that fee, a percentage of that is reserved for agents. Those are CPAs, lawyers, the people that are helping you pull your application together. And that is how Congress has intended for those people to be paid. So if your accountant turns around and sends you a bill for the 4 hours he or she was working on this for you, be sure to ask them about the fee that they're receiving, because there is a provision in the statute that you should not be billed for the work that goes into getting yourself ready to complete the application process.
Well, that's tremendous information. So the bottom line is that we all have an excellent opportunity to benefit from this program. It sounds like most of us will be eligible. But we need to get moving right away. We need to start collecting our employment record right now as far as the wages, any health care that went into that, and the associated pieces, visiting the SBA site to get that form, and connecting with your accountant and banker right away. Outside of this program, Jeff, are there any other things that we might have availability to that could help us?
You know, the CARE Act has a lot of different provisions, and a lot of this is going to come into effect when you file your taxes, either this year on the extended deadline or even into next year. So make sure you're working with your accountant closely to kind of unravel all this as it comes out. But the other immediate thing that is part of the package, and this was actually passed as part of phase 2 of their response to the coronavirus situation, is what they call an SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan, or an EIDL loan. What's amazing about this, and this is actually a loan, this isn't going to be forgiven, but what you're doing is you're saying, hey, my business has been damaged as a result of this, and I'm applying for a loan to help me bridge the gap from while this crisis is occurring until I can get back on my feet. And the amounts can go up to $10 million. If they're under $200,000, you can self-certify. You don't need tax returns. You're not going to personally guarantee it. And what you're going to do is kind of fill out all the information that you would need in terms of what your monthly expenses are and things like that. And you're going to apply to the SBA for a loan, again, up to $10 million. Now, once you're above $200,000, there's a lot more paperwork, personnel guarantees, collateral that comes into effect. But below $200,000, literally, they're going to underwrite this based on your credit score. and the history you have with any previous SBA or government loan programs. So it's pretty liberal. But here's the biggest thing. As part of your application process, you can apply for an immediate $10,000 advance that they will get into your account within 36 hours of your application, not your approval, your application. That $10,000 is fully forgiven. It is solely for the purpose to help your business. Now, if you're ultimately approved for a $150,000 loan, they're only going to give you a 140 because you've already got the 10 up front. But if you're turned down for the loan, you still get to keep the $10,000. This is literally $10,000 of free money to businesses that are applying because their operations, they can demonstrate that their operations have been interrupted. If you decide to carry the loan going forward, it's a 30-year loan at 3.75%. Again, not personally guaranteed and not collateralized as long as you're below the $200,000 threshold.
Another tremendous option. And do I understand that we could apply for both of these programs?
So there's some ambiguity on that. There are some regulations that appear to say you can do one or the other, but not both. There's others that say you can do both without any problem. And there's some some regulations that say you can use one for one entity, and if you happen to have multiple entities, you can use the other for that. This is a great example of where some of that clarity doesn't exist yet. So that's a question I would definitely pose to your CPA and to your banker. You clearly want to take advantage of everything that is available to you, but until we get more clarification on that, I can't comment on that definitively.
And we are grateful for what you have been able to comment on. I know the official rules really don't even come out until tomorrow. So for you to have this amount of information is incredible. I know that you've been spending every minute of your waking days talking to your accountants and the firms that depend on you. So I really appreciate you taking time to talk with us. I knew that you'd be a wealth of information. Jeff and I are in a mastermind group together, so I get to benefit from his input on a regular basis. And getting to know Jeff, I also know that although he's a wealth of information when it comes to accounting and business, he's also a rock star. If you look in the background, you're going to see some instruments and a keyboard. Jeff's part of a band, the Traveling Salvation Show, a Neil Diamond tribute band. If you have not checked it out, you're going to want to visit their Facebook page and check out Holy Holy. Awesome song. They do a great job. So Jeff, thank you for spending part of your evening. I know you've still got more calls to make. We're very grateful for you sharing this information. We'll look forward to connecting in the future. I hope you stay healthy.
Tim, thanks so much. Best wishes to you and all your listeners. Take care.
Thank you.